Hello and welcome back to the channel on our continuing voyage to become better blues players. My name's Mark, and in this lesson we're going to be looking at tips, tricks, advice, techniques for when you're playing your blues guitar solos with a live band in front of an audience. So this follows on from the last couple of lessons in the series on improvisation. We looked at techniques and ideas for practicing improvisation, and then we looked at a lesson on how to improvise in front of a live audience for the first time and overcoming those particular challenges. This particular lesson now we're going to be looking at, imagining we're in a blues band, we're playing a set, playing all night, 2 hours, maybe more, and we're going to improvise the majority, if not all, of the guitar solos that we're going to play in the course of that set. So tips, tricks and ideas, and basically my experience of 20 plus, nearly 25 years of playing blues guitar solos improvised in front of an audience. I will teach you the things to avoid and how to kind of make that interesting for the audience. So a couple of points before we get into specifically about improvisation, just a couple of general points about playing a solo or playing in a band in front of an audience. The first one is a tip that's actually nothing. I picked up this tip and it wasn't even to do with music, it was to do with public speaking, but it actually makes perfect sense. It's ideal. It's 3 P's. You prepare, you practice, and you perform. So no matter what you're doing, whether it's public speaking or whether it's playing a guitar solo, you have to put in those 3 P's. You have to prepare, you have to do your groundwork, you have to have worked out where your good notes are and all those things that we talked about in the previous lessons. You have to practice, you have to, even though you're going to improvise, even though you don't know what you're going to play because you're going to make it up on the spot, you've got to put the practice in so you've got that good stuff to draw from. In the previous lessons we talked about basically practicing so that we turn up to a solo with a big bag of licks and we can choose any one of them, we can pull them out and we'll have a rummage round and dig out the next one and think, what shall I play next? But you're turning up to the solo already prepared. So that's the first thing, is to prepare. The second one is to practice so that you've got that down, and then the third one is when it comes to the moment, you really perform. Don't shy away from it, actually dig in and perform. Play with confidence. Even if the solo is, the band drops down, it's a slow, soft, you're playing with real emotion. Playing softly doesn't mean playing timidly. You can play with confidence even though you're playing gently and softly. That's a big difference between that and just playing quite timidly and scared. If you're timid and you're scared, your bends are probably not going to be to pitch, they're not going to be right, you're not going to have them under control. So always play with confidence. Even if you're playing softly, play it with confidence. Okay, so that was kind of some general tips about performing generally. So let's think about now the song, the whole set, and what I'll start with is some advice that I read in a Guitarist magazine interview in probably the late 90s. It was an interview with John Mayall, and he gave a tip which is superb. He was talking about it in the context of recording an album of blues. The accusation essentially being that blues can be quite repetitive and it can be a bit boring. How do you avoid that? And that's true, actually. That's kind of like the worst thing, the thing that we have to try and avoid the most as blues players is not being repetitive and how to keep it interesting. Anyway, John Mayall's advice when he set out to record an album is, he says, with every album, and he's done a lot of them, with every album you don't have 2 songs which are in the same key at the same tempo. As much as you can, vary the keys and vary the tempos. That forces us as guitar players to play differently because we're going to be thrown around the neck a little bit. So the same advice I think goes for when we're playing a live set. When you're organising your set list, make sure you've got songs in different keys. It'll force you to play differently. If you write your own songs, try writing them in different keys because it'll force you to write slightly differently because you'll have to adjust the melody and things. It just forces you to think slightly differently, and that's always a good thing. What you might find is that the singer, maybe because they're a little bit limited or whatever, but the singer may only be able to sing in a few different keys, and so you might not be able to do like the full range, but you might kind of find yourself keep coming back to same old keys. Unfortunately, sometimes because of the singer, that's kind of unavoidable, but try as much as you can to vary things up. So different keys, different tempos. Don't just play 12 bar blues in here at 100 beats per minute, because we all love doing that, but that gets boring quite quickly for an audience. You want to vary things up. So different keys, different tempos, but also think about different beats. Make sure in your set that you got a hard shuffle, have you got a straight 4/4, have you got a rumba, have you got a 12/8, have you got a swing, have you got one that's got more like a classic rock groove to it or something. So you can vary all these things up and just bring in a bit of variety to stop us just repeating the same old things. So those are some general tips around working out your set list. And if you bring in those varieties, it'll force you as a soloist to play differently, and it'll also help your songs sound more individual and more memorable to the audience. So that's always a good thing. There's nothing worse than going and watching a blues band. Well, there are some things that are worse, but generally musically, not much is worse than going and watching a blues band and they're playing every song mid-tempo blues in E. And they're having a whale of a time because they're just playing, where they're comfortable. But from an audience, as an audience member, that can get really boring. And unfortunately these days, there's not that many kind of real hardcore blues fans out there. What you generally find when you're playing live is that the audience may like a bit of blues, but that's not all they like. Now, I'm not saying you should play different styles. You can just play straight 12 bar blues all night if you want. But you have to be aware that the audience is going to not want to just sit on a 12 bar blues in E mid-tempo all night. They are going to want you to vary things up. So you can still play blues, you can still play authentic blues and vary things up. You listen to B.B. King, every song sounds differently. They don't all sound the same. Muddy Waters, every Muddy Waters song's memorable and tuneful and different. So it can be done. So just bear that in mind, that the audience likes a bit of variety. So try and bring that into your set. Okay, so specifically around improvising a solo, what you want to do is you want to look at your set list and you want to make every solo stand out, be a little bit different. Now, having them in different keys and different things like that, that is going to help. But what other things can you bring in to make individual solos stand out? Well, you can have a solo, you plan out your set and say, okay, well, this solo, I'm going to mix major and minor. So that's one of the topics that we taught early on in this series, how to mix major and minor. It gives a very particular sound. Okay, so this solo is going to be, I'm going to mix major and minor. This next solo, I'm just going to stick to straight minor pentatonic. No messing around with the major notes. Just lean into those minor pentatonic notes and make those kind of like dirty blues sounds. Next solo, okay, I'll do something different. I'll bring in the chord tones and the arpeggios that we looked at in one of the lessons. Another solo, you might think, okay, when I go to that solo, I'm going to focus on box position 1 and 2. And then the next solo, I'm going to focus in on the BB box. And then on the next solo, I'm going to focus in on box 4 and 5. Even just doing things like that will force you to play a little differently because your root note's on a different finger. You have to adjust your playing accordingly. You have different, even though it's the same notes, you have different licks that you play in the different box positions. So doing things like that helps kind of keep that variety, makes you think, keeps you on your toes, playing. You're not just leaning on the same old licks for every single song. Unfortunately, I've done that. I've played in bands where every solo, and I'm taking a lot of solos that night, I'm just, whichever key I'm in, I'm just immediately going to box position 1 and playing the same old thing. And then halfway through the gig, I'm thinking, well, I'm bored. So if I'm bored, the audience must be really bored. Okay, so other things that you can do is you can vary your tone. So have a guitar solo that's with a particularly clean sound. Have another one that's with a dirtier sound, a bit of grit going through the amp. Also think about effects. Classic effects for blues players, blues classic rock players maybe a little bit more, but still. wah-wah pedals, fuzz pedals, univibe, tremolo, rotary speaker. You don't have to be a classic rock player. I mean, Stevie Ray Vaughan's used all of those things. I think the key really, if you're a blues player, is not to overdo it. So you're not doing a different one of those effects or combinations of those effects on every single solo. For me personally, if I play in an electric band, I like to have one song in each set, at least one song in each set with a wah-wah pedal. I don't wah-wah pedal every solo, but having it in one in each set is that's nice. It kind of breaks things up, makes it a little bit more interesting. So you can add these things a little bit sparingly, but it just adds more colour, more variety to your set as you're playing. And also with having certain effects, you play slightly differently. When you've got a dirtier sound, I tend to hold the notes more because they sustain easier. It changes the way you play as well. So that's all of those things are going to bring in different variety in sounds. Now, don't worry, you're not going to become a chameleon. You're not going to sound like a completely different guitar player on every song. Just by nature, that's not going to happen. What's going to happen is you're still going to come through, because you are always going to be relying on certain note combinations and things. Even when you're doing all this variety, you're still going to sound like you. You're just going to sound like you, but in with a lot more kind of different color tones and variety to pull from, to kind of keep it, as I say, keep it interesting for the audience. That's the key to this whole thing. Okay, another thing that I would do is try and build movement in a guitar solo. So an easy way of doing that, or one of the easiest ways, is to build intensity. So don't jump in with the start of the solo really kind of going for it. Start off nice and gentle, and then build up and build up and build in intensity. One of the great things that you can do is, if you plan this out in advance, even though it's improvised and you don't know what you're going to play, you just know you're going to build intensity during the solo, is practice that with the band in the rehearsal room, so they do the same thing as well, so they build up intensity as you do. So that maybe the guitar solo, you all just deliberately start quite low key and you all build up together and feed off one another. You get that right and it can sound fantastic, really, really interesting, and it can kind of take the audience with you. Now, there's loads and loads of guitar solos that kind of illustrate this point. I'm going to give you a couple of my favorites. They're not actually blues solos, but if you listen to them, you get the idea. So Stairway to Heaven does this. He starts around the middle of the neck. By the time he's ended up the top end of the neck, and he's kind of going for it a bit more, not a bit more, quite a bit more. That's an interesting solo. Apparently that was improvised, which is really interesting to listen to. But that's definitely a solo that builds in intensity as we go through. Another one, slightly lesser known, is the 80s glam metal band Europe. They have a song called Superstitious off their less famous album. The guitar player was Key Marcello, and he's fantastic. Now, he is more of a rock player than a blues player, but you might want to check out this solo anyway, because what he does, and this is a really cool thing to kind of idea to steal, is he starts playing very melodically and relatively simply melodically, and as the solo builds, he gets more and more dirty in his playing, and builds in intensity and speed as well, and it sounds great. Now, I'm not suggesting that you learn to play his particular solo, because it's an 80s glam metal solo, so it's not really our thing as blues players. But the idea is really good, and it is a nice solo to listen to. You can adapt that to your blues playing. You can start very melodically, start with the major pentatonics, and then build in intensity. As the band builds in intensity too, you build up, playing slightly faster licks. Maybe if you're playing electric guitar, really digging in and doing that kind of stuff, and leaning more on the minor sounds, doing all of those kind of things. Kind of the same idea. But anyway, that's a great solo. Also worth looking at is Comfortably Numb. I mean, probably, in my opinion, the greatest guitar solo ever written, ever recorded. Absolutely superb. One of the interesting things there is, again, builds in intensity, and the drummer is building, the whole band's building with intensity as well. But by the we get to the end of the second solo, I think it is, he's hitting these notes on the beat, and the drummer is hitting the crash cymbal on the beat as well, and the two are really in sync, and the whole band's kind of started with this cool solo that's built and built and built, and you got this like huge crescendo and things. Fantastic. Again, another example. For me, there's many things that make that solo fantastic, but one of them is the fact that the band build as well, and he's so much in sync with the drums and what's going on there that it really kind of emphasizes his playing. Now, you don't need a great big band, you don't need to even be playing electric guitar to do this. When in the days before COVID, when I used to play out live with Northbound, we would do this with just bass, harmonica, and rhythm guitar. I would be playing the rhythm guitar, the harmonica player would be improvising, but the idea is the same. You can adapt the same idea for your for playing guitar. What we did was we've got a song called Weep and Worry, and it has a particular riff that's played on the harmonica, and that's in between each verse. And when we came to the solo, it's quite an upbeat, kind of rocky as you can get with a harmonica and acoustic guitar, but that's the way it is. We play the riff, and then what we decided to do for the solo is, as soon as the riff finishes, the band really drop down. So the bass, the guitar, and the harmonica, they all drop down in intensity and play very softly, and the solo starts very soft. So we've come in from the vocals going out, we've got this riff that kind of increases in intensity, and then we drop right down. And then what we did is we worked out, okay, we're going to go around the progression 6 times, and the first 2 times is very, very low intensity. The second 2 times we're going to build it, and then by the end I'm absolutely beating the guitar because we're really going for it as much as we can, and the harmonica player's doing it and everything, and the singer knows it's a fixed length solo, and when we get to 6 times through, bang, singer's back in, harmonica player drops back out, and we're back into the verse. It took a bit of practice to get it right in the rehearsal room, but once we did, and then we took it out live, always got a good reaction, because it really had movement in the solo. And you could take that same idea and apply it to playing an electric or an acoustic guitar solo. It doesn't have to be harmonica. Anyway, that's one of my own songs. So another idea of creating movement in the solo is very, very simply start low on the neck, and as the solo builds, walk up the neck and until you're kind of high up. Just walk up through those box positions. Couple of licks in box position 1, couple in 2, couple in box position 3, and so on, as up the neck as much as you're comfortable doing. So you can do that kind of thing as well. One thing that I do that really does, that I like to do that creates some movement in the solo, is midways through the solo have stabs. I don't know if stabs are the right word for this, but that's kind of how I describe it. And I do this in every band that I've ever been in, and I do it in a lot of the backing tracks. So if you've played over my backing tracks, you'll be familiar with this. But basically, partway through the song, we're playing a 12-bar blues. We come out of the turnaround, and the whole band hit the first beat of the first bar, and then silence, and then hit the first beat of the second bar, and then silence. But the soloist carries on. So if I'm soloing, the band are doing this, but I'm just carrying on regardless. Or if one of the other soloists is doing it, they're doing it, and I'm hitting the stabs and then silence. So it kind of go like this. If you imagine we come out the turnaround, and then I'll do the stabs. So if we're in E, I hope you can hear this. I haven't got the mic set up properly for it, but you get the idea. Okay, so if we come out of the turnaround, and then I'll do the stabs. Okay, so that's an idea. So I was stabbing on the first beat of the first bar, the second bar, the third bar, and then for the fourth one, I played it again and the whole band will come in. You practice that. You can stab on any of these bars. I like to do it on bars 1, 2, 3, and then come in on the 4th, and then what would that be, 5, 6, and then stab again on 7 and 8. And if you've played over my backing tracks, you'll have spotted that, because I do that quite a lot. I love doing that. When you're soloing, if you can arrange it so that the band know to do this midway through the solo, it suddenly breaks it up, catches the audience off guard, catches their attention. Ooh, what's going on? That's interesting. And you've got their attention and they're listening to your solo. So yeah, so that's something I would put in. I'll be honest, I use that little trick a lot. I don't just do it for solos. I've done it for guitar solos, harmonica solos. In Northbound, we used it on a bass solo because the bass player didn't want to play a solo. And let's face it, nobody enjoys a bass solo when you hear, like, you know, just the bass player wandering off playing what appears to be nonsense for a while. So what we did was we said, well, there's one song. The bass player just wanted to play like the standard rhythm, just keep the rhythm going, the bass line, wherever it was. And we said, okay, well, we'll pretend it's a bass solo. You just play your normal bass line, but we'll stab around it. And we stabbed every bar of the 12 bar. Audience loved it. You only do it once, you wouldn't do it in every song, but it breaks it up, it keeps it interesting. I actually do it as well for vocals. So again, Northbound song, Room with a View. We come out of the solo, I think it's again a harmonica solo. We come out of the solo and we stab when the vocals come back in. So the singer ends up singing completely a cappella for just 3 beats of the bar, and then we stab the next one, and so on. And we did this for, so you come out of the solo and then verse 3. So I'll do this whether I'm soloing, whether somebody else is soloing, or even for vocals. And again, it just catches the audience off guard. It sounds interesting, sounds a bit different. Yeah, it keeps that interest up all night. Okay, so I think we've covered. Oh, one other thing that you can do that I have done, and I'll tell you kind of a horror story that goes with this, is change scale midway through the solo. And yes, that is kind of as scary as it sounds, but it can be done, and if it works well, it's brilliant. If you think of the song While My Guitar Gently Weeps, which is a wonderful, wonderful song, and one of my favorite songs to play and to solo over, the verse is in A minor, the chorus is in A major. You don't get quite that change in a lot of songs. It's quite unusual. What I tried to do was, we had a band. I was in a covers band at the time, and what we did was we'll say, right, the first half of the solo is over the verse, the second half is over the chorus. So we've got a key change midway through the guitar solo, but we all do it, and I will change, and I'll stop playing A minor pentatonic and slip into playing A major. This was the plan. Now, we tried this in the rehearsal room, and the band were getting it right, but they weren't getting it right every time. In fact, they were probably getting it right about one time in 3. So we practiced this for quite a while in the rehearsal room, and then we did it live. And in the rehearsal room, when it worked, it sounded fabulous, because suddenly, you know, there was this shift, it sounded interesting. The verse part, I think also the drummer would change their pattern because when they went into the chorus. So the whole thing midway through the solo, it shifted and it sounded fantastic. Unfortunately, the band couldn't really count, so they didn't really know when the end of the verse was and when the start of the chorus was, and basically everybody did it in a different place, and they'd all be looking at each other going, what's going on? And I'm trying to solo, and there would always be at least one of us playing A minor, and while there's at least one of us playing A major, and that just sounds horrific. So I think we only tried it live maybe once or twice, and in the end I said, no, forget it, it's not going to work. We're just not good enough to do that, to pull that off live. So we ended up just doing, okay, well, I'll just solo over the verse then, and we all just stay in A minor because that's nice and easy. But if you've got a band who can actually count and who can communicate with one another, and we can all, and it can work, doing a change as dramatic as that midway through the solo will sound fantastic. But it really does depend on how good your bandmates are. So anyway, it's something to think about. If I was in the right band, I would definitely do that again, because it did sound great when it works. Other thing to think about is if you've got another soloist in the band. So again, I'm relying on my experiences here, but with Northbound, Matt, fantastic harmonica player. One thing that we would do a lot, well, not a lot, but we'd have, I think it was 2, maybe 3 songs a night where the solo would be us playing off one another. So I'd play a lick, then he'd play a lick, then I'd play a lick, then he'd play a lick. And you do that. Again, I wouldn't do it for every song, but a couple of songs through, you know, a 2.5 hour set, 2-hour set. Just to do that for a couple of songs in the night. It sounds really interesting, keeps the band interested, keeps you interested, keeps the audience interested. You can do it as trade of 4s. So if you've watched my Lockdown Blues Jams video and played along with me, that's what that is. What me and Matt used to do was literally just, I'll play a lick, and the lick would usually just be a bar, 2 bars, 3 bars. And he'd basically wait for me to finish my lick, and then he'd jump in and do his, and vice versa. And sometimes if one of us thought the other one was going on a little bit too long, we'll just jump in anyway. But you get to know one another, and you get to play with one another as you get used to each other's playing and stuff. It can be really good, really interesting. Okay, so those are kind of the techniques and ideas that I've developed over 25 plus years of playing. Some of those things have come about because I've made mistakes. I've bored the audience, literally bored the audience to the point where they've left. Some of those things are because I've tried things and they haven't worked or whatever. But nowadays, when I'm playing bands, I've learned from those mistakes. So I'm passing that kind of knowledge and experience onto you. So yes, it's built up of 25 plus years of playing improvising guitar solos in front of an audience, and when it works and when it comes together, it's absolutely magic, and it's the best feeling you can have playing music, improvising in front of an audience. They're into it, you're into it, it's all fantastic, and everybody's having a fantastic time. So that's wonderful. So that's what I'm trying to kind of get across to use, give you techniques to kind of get you to that place. If you found this series valuable, then please consider showing your appreciation via PayPal, my PayPal tip jar. I've also got Patreon supporters club, so if you want to become a member of the Patreon supporters, you get extra videos and things like that. Details of both of those things are in the description below. I hope you've enjoyed this series. The next video should be the last one in the series, and we're going to be talking about, particularly about improvising on record in the recording studio. So I'll see you next time. Take care.